Welcome to the Archives. My name is Marcus Robbins. I'm a University Archivist. And happy LGBT Day month. And in celebration of LGBT month, it is also Archives month. Yeah, can you believe it? We also have a month. And so in celebration of both of those, we have a presentation this evening of Dr. Chet DeFonso, who I like to affectionately call the great poobah, man about town, the gadfly looking for Mr. Goodbar. You've seen him everywhere. He's kind of the unofficial mayor of Marquette. But before I introduce him, as I'm trying to do, I'd just want to remind you that you're in the University Archives. This is the Central Upper Peninsula University Archives. This is part of our outreach programming called Evening at the Archives, and it's designed to try to, draw attention to us and publicize the archives. I'd like to point out that this is a place where you can come. It's a safe place. It's a quiet place. It's a place you can come just to study. You don't have to have any reason to be here to review our records. Our collections are available, and Nikki Wilhelm, our next presenter this evening as well, is going to talk a little bit about how you can find out about those. I just want to emphasize that it's a place you can come to, and it's not this stuffy elitist kind of thing. And without further ado, and I hope you all know that Dr. Chet DeFonso is also a professor of history here at NMU. Chet?
Thanks. Nikki, I figured I'd speak for about 25, 30 minutes maybe, and then you speak, do your thing, and then we'll answer any questions.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay.
Not too late.
Hi there, Tony.
Hello.
Hi, how are you? Well, it's great to see you all here tonight. It's Archives Month and it's LGBTQ History Month, and those things go together like stuff. They go together like stuff. They really do, and it's just natural and destiny that I am here tonight, because it's two things that I really love to talk about. Archival stuff, archival research, history, and LGBT identity. And these things are coming together. It's really a big thing. There are people who are writing about this, researching it. There are people who are living it and doing it. It's called the archival turn. And it's kind of a phenomenon, a grassroots phenomenon, all over the country and around the world. How the archives are becoming a space. They're becoming a place. They're becoming a venue for people who are in search of an identity, in search of a way of expressing themselves, in search of a way of having a story of themselves, their community, and also for their future as well, because the archive is not just about the past, it's also about the future, because the people who control the archives are the people who are going to be setting the tone, setting the record, and setting the agenda for the future. So it's really great to see you all here, to hear a little bit, to think a little bit about the archives as a queer space, and then maybe to have some discussion about it afterwards. Just my little turn here, archives, queering the archives. Archives as a supportive, integrative, and active space for queer, non-normative individuals and sexualities. Okay, time for a commercial break. So the commercial break, it's registration time for NMU, and you are all eligible for enrolling in classes that are part of the gender and sexuality minor at NMU. We do have a program in gender and sexuality studies, which includes a variety of offerings. You can find those offerings at the Gender and Sexuality Studies Facebook page, or by going to the NMU homepage and seeing what is being offered. The course that I teach on gay and lesbian history is part of that minor. Unfortunately, it's not being offered in the winter semester, but there are some other fine offerings as well. Thank you. That was the commercial portion of tonight's presentation. Back to queering the archives. And as I was mentioning, it's a big thing. This is a very important journal in the historical profession, the journal Radical History Review. And this is their current issue, Queering Archives, Intimate Tracings. And it's a collection of essays by scholars who are working in the archives and with archives and about the archives today. And here's another important presenter and publishing person and scholar who works with archives. Her name's Ann Vetkovich. She teaches at the University of Texas at Austin. She was out in UCLA, part of their colloquium series, sponsored by the Department of Information Studies, speaking on Keynote, Affect, and the Archive. So just a little bit more about these activities, these scholarly activities. This book, Queering Archives, Intimate Tracings. This issue considers how archives allow historical traces of sexuality and gender to be sought, identified, recorded, and assembled into accumulations of meaning. Contributors explore conundrums in contemporary queer archival methods, probing some of them in essays on the Catholic Church and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This issue also includes a series of intergenerational interviews reflecting on histories of LGBT archives, a roundtable discussion about legacies of queer studies of the archive, and a closing reflection by Joan Nestle, a founding figure in the practice of international queer archiving. So there's a lot of active scholars, individuals who are involved in exciting research, who are using the archives, but they're also critiquing the archives to understand what it's all about. Just really fascinating time to be working in archives and to be thinking about what archives have to offer. So a good place to start thinking about the archives is by looking at LGAR. That's an acronym, an abbreviation for the Lesbian and Gay Archives Roundtable. And they have a very active presence in the archival community. If I can come up to their site here. The Lesbian and Gay Archives Roundtable was founded in 1989 by members of the Society of American Archivists who were concerned about lesbian and gay history and the role of lesbian and gays in the archival profession. The group, which welcomes non-members of the society and people of all sexual orientations, promotes the preservation and research use of records documenting lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender history, and serves as a liaison between lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transsexual archives in the Society of American Archivists. So they have a lot of interesting information here, and I would love to spend some more time looking at it. They have presences on Twitter and on Facebook as well. But what I want to focus on right now is this link here, the Lavender Legacies Guide. And this is a compendium of archival sites all over North America that are useful for those people interested in knowing more, researching, studying lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer identities. Very helpfully organized by state and also by Canadian province. Just we can come down here to Michigan, and voila, a number of listings in Michigan. Alas, not the Central Upper Peninsula and Northern Michigan University
This is
Archive.
an outrage.
But
I will correct this problem.
There's no reason why it would not be up here. We have the Bentley Historical Library, University of Michigan, Central Michigan, Detroit Public Library, Library of Michigan, Michigan State University, University of Michigan, and then Wayne State University. And what's really great about this site is that it tells you a little bit about each archive and also their particular holdings and what they have that's useful or interesting in that particular area. So lots of interesting information here. Lots of good information for somebody who wants to do some research or who might be interested in going to another school for graduate work. Well, to know what's actually out there. So, for example, here at Wayne State, the Ruther Library, they have extensive holdings in LGBTQ material. They have material that relates to the lesbian and gay movement in Detroit. Ernest Holm, a retired General Motors research librarian and archivist, has been a known activist in the Detroit gay civil rights movement since 1979, holding membership and leadership positions in several LGBT organizations. His papers document the activities of gay and lesbian liberation movement in Detroit, primarily through the records of these organizations: the Association of Suburban People, ASP, the Southeast Gay and Lesbian Council, and the Detroit Area Gay and Lesbian Council. So, and also they have the Michigan Coalition for Human Rights. So you can find out what's in these archives without having to actually visit them in person. Just a fantastic resource here. Okay, come down. Whoops, did I go too far? Uh-oh. How do I get back to my presentation?
Right there, word.
Okay, there we are. Yay! Good. Lavender Legacies, a guide to sources in North America. Well, let's look at some particular archives around the upper Midwest. Some that you may know of and some that you may not. One of the most interesting archives in our region is the International Leather Archives and Museum of Chicago, which is the only leather archive in the United States and one of only 3 in the world. There's another leather archive in Sydney, Australia, and then the third one is in Berlin, Germany. But it's generally felt that this one in Chicago is outstanding in the world. It's in the Rogers Park neighborhood, which is way up close to Evanston, far northern Chicago, in a nice, modest building that at one time served as a community center, and now has been purchased by the organization and houses their extensive collection. The Leather Archives and Museum, they are a very professional organization. They have really good informational material, located in Chicago, serving the world. We'll come back and look at the site in a little bit. The archive was founded in 1991 by Chuck Renslow, who is still alive. Chuck Renslow was born in 1929, so he's 86 years old and still quite strong, quite active in the Chicago LGBT community. There's a biography of him, Leatherman, The Legend of Chuck Renslow. If you're at all into fetish, if you're into leather, Chuck Renslow is a major figure of great international importance. He actually designed this flag, which is now the International Leather Man's and Women's Flag, which is known around the world as an image. If you see that flag flying outside of a bar, It means that it's a leather bar. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you wouldn't be welcome if you were dressed, say, like this, but you probably wouldn't want to go in if you were dressed like this in a leather bar. You probably wouldn't. Not that they'd be mean or anything, they just suggest that there's probably another bar somewhere else you'd prefer. Anyway, Chuck Renslow was a pioneer in gay publishing. Back in 1950, when he was just 21, he started his own photography and publishing magazine business. Only at that time, you weren't allowed to publish anything that was overtly gay or lesbian. He created physique magazines. I don't know if you've seen those, the ones with the beefcake models, almost naked men posing with G-strings or jock straps. They were physique magazines for men who were interested in muscles. They weren't for gay people at all, not for those homosexuals. He also founded the Chicago Motorcycle Club, which was the first motorcycle club in the United States outside of California. And later, in the late 1950s, he became a club owner, the Gold Coast in downtown Chicago, and the Eagle. He owned the first Eagle bar anywhere in the world. And he founded the International Man of Leather Convention, which is now the world's largest gathering of leather aficionados. He's also a photographer of modern dance and ballet. Just Renaissance man, a lot of different interests. His collection of dance photographs is now in the Newberry Library in downtown Chicago. I mentioned he's founded the International Man of Leather in 1973. Active in Democratic Party politics. You don't get to have a neighborhood like he lives in Chicago unless you work for it. And in Chicago, that means working through the Democratic Party machine. He served as a precinct captain and later as a delegate to the 1980 U.S. presidential nominating convention. He's still active in local politics. So, just want to go back up to this site. We can look a little bit at the leather archives. Leather Archives and Museum website offers information about a sexuality collection. By clicking continue below, you agree that you are at least 18 years of age, right? Everybody is, I don't know, is your dog 18?
He's 5.
5, but how old is that's 18 in human years.
Yeah, it's like 37
Okay.
human years.
Okay. You do not find sexuality resources or information offensive or illegal in your legal jurisdiction. Well, it's kind of interesting because this material about leather, about sexuality, about fetish and kink, some people would be uncomfortable with this. Some libraries and archives would be uncomfortable with this. The people who go to this archive are not uncomfortable with this. But that doesn't mean that it's sloppy or ill-organized. Everything here is organized as you would find in any professional archive around the world. So they have a section of online exhibits, just like the archive here. Aubrey's Playroom Archive. Aubrey's Playroom, a 60-minute internet talk show hosted by Aubrey Hart Sparks, featuring diverse conversations for the leather fetish, BDSM, and alternative sexuality communities. The show ran from 1999 to 2004, totaling 123 interviews. The Leather Pride Flag, the Oral History exhibit, the Sandmutopia Guardian magazine, a leather and fetish magazine, which is found in this collection, and some other material which I don't think is quite appropriate for tonight. But you can come back and find it at any time. I also want to show you some of the collections that they have, archival collections. Archival Collections at the Leather Archive Archive and Museum are personal, organizational, and conglomerate records with historical significance and enduring value to communities involved in kink, leather, fetish, sadomasochism, and alternative sexual practices. The LA&M is unique in that the community selects records as well as the institution. So they have a board that gathers and decides what gets in. It's not just the archivist, Marcus. It's an entire community.
I believe in autocracy.
Archives are the records created and or accumulated by people and organizations as they lived and worked. Archival collections can contain materials such as correspondence, journals, diaries, financial records, photographs, meeting minutes, artwork, reports, memorabilia, but also fibers, leathers, as well as sound recordings, video, and film. So in this archive, you'll find personal papers. You'll find organizational records. And you'll find conglomerate collections of material. Our collections have been used for documentaries, biographies, nonfiction books, blogs, doctoral dissertations, research papers, websites, and social media. Know your history. Learn more about the archival collection. They have an archival blog. Very, very well put together material here. Using the archive. Plan your dates. Collections are available during the museum gallery hours, but access to the collections is by appointment only. Patrons wishing to access materials for more than one day are advised to make an appointment. So let's say you want to know more about the history of leather, the history of fetish. Research is conducted in the library. You can bring into the library lead pencils, paper notebooks, binders, folders, and laptop computers. You're not permitted to bring in ink pens and markers, bags, purses, coats and jackets with pockets, food and beverages, scanners, or image-taking electronic devices, including tablets, cameras, and phones. You first meet with the archivist to talk about your research needs, and you get an orientation to the facility. You talk about your objectives, your goals. You learn about the material. It's the same procedure that you would follow if you were doing archival research here on the history of Cleveland Cliffs. A patron registration form. Now, they are somewhat more restrictive in terms of photography, but very, very interesting, very, very well organized collection here. Okay, so we will come out there and then come back here. Right, okay. For brevity's sake, I'm going to move on from Chicago, just passing and mention another interesting private library, the Gerber Hart Library and Archives, which is also located in Rogers Park, and which is also not affiliated with any institution. The Gerber Hart Library and Archives is named after two pioneering figures in the history of lesbian and gay, bisexual, transgender people. One of them, Henry Gerber, was the organizer of the very first gay rights organization in the United States, which he and some friends attempted to establish back in 1925. Now, you may remember Simone. We studied him. He was fired from his job and sent to jail for his subversive activities. The other person, Pearl Hart, was an attorney and a civil rights activist in Chicago in the 1950s and 60s. And she was also lesbian. And she was involved in the establishment of the first women's center in the city of Chicago. So both of them are honored with the establishment of this community library and archive. Now another collection, I want to talk about it in a little more detail is at the University of Minnesota. A lot of LGBTQ archives are now located in university facilities. University facilities have space, they have professional archivists, they have students, and they have a lot of institutional support, especially at major universities like Minnesota or Michigan or Stanford or Cornell. The University of Minnesota has a collection named after an individual, Jean Nicholas Tretter. In some ways, he's like the Chuck Renslow of the Leather Archive in that he was not an academic, not a professional archivist, just a person who was interested in the subject. And his subject was the story of gay men and lesbians in Minnesota. He was kind of a fanatic about it. He is a collector who just absorbs things, stacks things up. But in the late 1990s, he moved from one apartment to another, and in the process of doing so, made the decision to give his collection of material and memorabilia to the University of Minnesota. Here's a little bit about him. I have an audio clip. Is this going to work with audio?
Yeah, you just might have to turn the volume up.
We might not be able to hear it.
Okay.
The speakers on the laptop.
Okay, here's the... Okay, there we go. You can hear that.
Preserving Queer Culture, the Tretter Collection.
He also collected music, so these are also his own personal recordings.
And I was absolutely astounded at what was in this man's tiny apartment. There was hardly room for a human being to live. Every available space, including floor space, was taken up with books and records and memorabilia and newspapers, periodicals.
I've done research all over the country, from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, so I was very impressed with the Tretter collection from the very beginning.
The thing about this archive, it is history and culture to show people that all things LGBT aren't just sexuality.
The Tretter Archive attracts people literally from all over the world. The Tretter Collection really functions as a method of transferring historical knowledge to the following generation. People donate their lives literally to us, and we collect it, we organize it, and then we give it to the next generation so that they can learn from the generation that came before.
The special collection is a combination of an archive, a library, and a museum.
I would certainly recommend that people deposit their collections there because they'll be well cared for.
It's not just an academic institution, but it's open to anybody.
Vision, foresight, to recognize why something is valuable and to save them.
The Tretter Collection is an incredibly valuable asset to the local community, but it reaches out internationally, and we're quite lucky to have it here, I think.
So, just a little...
Jean Nicholas Tretter was born in 1946. He grew up in Little Falls, Minnesota. At the age of 10, he moved to the Twin Cities with his mother after his father had died. He served in the United States Navy during the Vietnam War as a decorated linguist. Jean studied social and cultural anthropology at the University of Minnesota from 1973 to 1976. Around this time, he began collecting gay and lesbian materials.
My name is Jean Tretter, or Jean Nicholas Tretter, whichever you prefer, and I'm not sure that I started out with the intention of a collection. The collection just kind of happened. I come from a family of collectors, and when I got out of the service, I was interested in gay and lesbian history and culture, and wanted to write and do more about it, promote it, let people know that it actually existed, because in those days a lot of people said, you can't have gay lesbian culture because there is no such thing. So I was interested in working on and with that, and so began an accumulation, let us call it, of all things lesbian and gay. I wrote for a local publisher here for a while by the name of Brad Tyson, who published Gays Magazine, and I wrote a history column called Baldur's Gate. So I wrote that column for I don't even know how many years, and I got involved with KFAI. For 16 years, I did a overnight show on gay and lesbian classical music. I went from there to basically just doing all the studying and lecturing and writing and that on my own, for which I was using this collection I had started.
Before it was an official collection, I got to know Jean.
So a lot of gay and lesbian archives start like that, with one person who just takes a lot of material in. And then eventually the person seeks to find a place for that material. Yeah, could I have a little bit extra? Just want to show you some of the material that they have. Okay, come over here. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. It's the Jean Nicholas Tretter Collection in Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, and Transgender Studies. And, again, very well organized, very well cataloged. These are all finding aids, which are the collections which are established there. Excuse me.
You want to take a break?
So, it's really important, since for us in rural area, in the past, so many of our lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender relatives and friends and parents and ancestors left the rural area to cities. So in order to do research on them, even if we want to know what they were doing when they grew up, we have to go to places like Minneapolis or Ann Arbor or Detroit. But you see, they have quite a lot. And one particular holding that I'm especially interested in exploring, if I have the opportunity to go and do some work there, is this collection of Two-Spirit papers. 70 years of material in the collection, records, visual materials, artifacts, and digital material from several different accessions, documenting the local Two-Spirit organization, American Indian Gays and Lesbians, as well as the personal experiences of GLBT activists from the Native American community. I really know very little about that story, that heritage myself. I never had the opportunity of studying it when I was a student. I would really find it exciting, a great opportunity to go and spend a couple days, a week, looking at this material. I think it would definitely improve my classes, as improve my ability to offer courses and material within my courses that are appropriate and needed for our own local community. So I do plan at some point in the near future to ask my colleagues in the history department to support me with a little financial assistance to spend some time doing some research in this archive. A lot of material which you would not find anywhere else, which you would not necessarily find published, you can find in this kind of material. The Two-Spirited Two-Spirits papers includes Two-Spirit issues, the representation of Native Americans in the national GLBT community, gender identity, HIV/AIDS prevention and treatment, and organizational records of the American Indian Gay and Lesbian Center in Minneapolis. Minneapolis is one of the most vibrant centers of Two-Spirit and American Indian LGBT activities, rivaled perhaps only by Seattle. Seattle and Minneapolis are both really the two major metropoles for Two-Spirits and American Indian LGBT activity. So that's my presentation. I'm going to pass the torch on to Nikki.
Questions?
But I will take questions with Nikki.
After? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Well, then at this point, it's a great pleasure that I introduce Nikki Wilhelm. She is a student major in history at NMU, and she's also a student intern here at the archives this semester. Nikki is phenomenal. She's a great student, has a critical mind and an exacting mind, and has been doing a great deal of work on a major grant application which is relevant to archives. And she's got a new project. She's going to correct that problem that is on the SAA website that Dr. DeFonso pointed out, that we're not listed there. We do have collections. Nikki's going to talk about now is just exactly what is the archives have here related to LGBT history. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Marcus, I'm disappointed you let Frank beat you to the punch on that one, by the way, on the SAA website.
Oh, I know. I'm really upset.
I'm disappointed.
I can't tell you. We will be discussing this tomorrow.
Yep, will do. Okay, so you already know the name of the presentation, Queering the Archives, and I'm here as a representative for the Central Peninsula and NMU Archives. The presentation stick wants to, no, okay.
Oh, if you ever turn it on, turn it off for the battery.
Oh, okay, that'll do it. There we go. Okay, so we are, as I'm now coining us, your friendly neighborhood queer archive. So archives previous to about the 1950s to the 1970s were generally run by the social elite, those that had the power and the money to get their records stored in archives, and those with the ability to write history, basically. In America, obviously, it's typically rich white males. So, Howard Zinn, an archivist, gave a speech called Secrecy, Archives, and the Public Interest. And this was right around the time that postmodernism was coming into play in America. And he really admonished the archival profession for not giving the light of day to marginalized groups, women, LGBTQ, racial minorities, ethnic backgrounds, religions, etc. And he really wanted to get rid of this image of the elitist archive, the archive that only those up in the ivory tower or those. It's fine. I just accidentally bumped it. There we go. He really wanted to get rid of that image, and he wanted to make it a public place, a safe place for all of those marginalized groups. And he wanted to really push for archives to begin recording that history, because if we look back in 100 years and we don't see it, we won't know it exists. We don't know how important it is in everyday life. So here at the NMU Archives, it's not specifically in our collection development policy, but we do really make it a point to actively seek out and acquire records and information on the LGBTQ community. And we do that a lot through incidental acquirements, whether it's legislation or church records, anything like that. But we also do actively seek out specifically LGBTQ records. So maybe some of you haven't really used archives in the past. We typically organize records using collection finding aids, and those are just documents that'll give you any information you might need on it, years covered, when it was acquired, brief historical and biographical notes on whatever organization or person it might be on. And we store all of those on a database called ArchiveSpace. And you can see there I have the URLs up there for the NMU ArchiveSpace database, as well as the Olson Library Catalog, which you can also find all of our collections through there, and any published works that we might have up in the library. And the great thing about ArchiveSpace is we recently migrated over to it, and our collection finding aids didn't really have this before, but now we can do subject tags on finding aids, person and organizational tags, anything that might help you find related collections when you're looking through and going about your research. And as Marcus said, I'm working on a project right now to, as part of the grant, to go around the UP and find any collections that we might not have in our database. And once we do that, we'll have a lot more repositories up there that you can specifically search in and find what we might have across the UP instead of just here in the NMU archives. And the best way to find our collections is going to be asking the staff. Online, you can find a lot of our collections, but some of them might have finding aids, but they aren't published. Some of them might not be finished processing yet. And the staff is really friendly and helpful and can help you get to the collections that you need to research. And they're also knowledgeable about the collections and can help you find any related collections that you might not have considered. So I wanted to note a couple of the collections that we have. We have a nice collection of the Allies and Outlook papers. A little bit of background on that. Outlook began as the Gay, Bisexual, Lesbian Student Union in '93, if I'm correct, Dr. DeFonso? Okay. And it eventually changed its name to Outlook in the 1997 academic year. And these are some gross simplifications of what the organizations do, but they promote awareness and provide safe spaces for the LGBTQ community. Our collections typically have things like meeting minutes from any meetings that might be held on campus as a part of these institutions, organizations. We also have a lot of information on events that these clubs and groups put on. We have a lot of great stuff about, like Allies did Blue Jean Day a while back. A while, when I say a while, I mean like 20 years. So we have stuff like newspaper clippings, community responses, interorganizational records for that, how they set it up, how they advertised it. And we have that for a lot of events that the LGBTQ community puts on here. And obviously Outlook does the drag show, and we have a lot of records on that. I actually have a poster I'll be showing, which I found today. I absolutely loved that. That's the second annual drag show poster. I was really excited about that poster today.
Back when it was in the Great Lakes room.
Yeah, so I mean that's another example of what you might find if you come here physically rather than just through the database online. Like, I was just flipping through this today, and I found this poster and a really great collection of Coming Out Day in 1995. They had a great poster set up, and they had a bunch of photos, and yeah, that's really wonderful. We also have a fantastic microfilm collection over in those big cupboards over there, the gray and sort of whitish ones. We have a lot of newspapers, newsletters from across the UP and here at NMU. We have a lot of papers from NMU. NMU, for one reason or another, went through a lot of different publication names. Northern College News, Northern Normal College News, Northwind, Northern News, etc. We also have a lot of great microfilm collections for smaller towns, like Noggin, for example. We have a couple newspapers from there. We also have a lot of Native American tribal newspapers. I recently did a resource guide on some of the Native American resources we have here at the archives, and a lot of that consists of tribal newspapers, so you might find LGBTQ community information there. As Dr. DeFonso pointed out, there was the Two Spirits organization at the other archives we looked at, so you might find something like that. We also have the Aurora newsletter collection, which worked a lot with institutions throughout the UP and specifically with NMU and MTU on disseminating LGBTQ news, any events that might be happening across the UP, particularly at university campuses. And we also have the In Focus newsletters in one of our collections, which was published by the Marquette's Women's Center, that goes over a lot of women's issues and LGBT issues. We also have a lot of material related to Michigan legislators and representatives. So, for example, we have the Bart Stupak collection, which he notably for this presentation voted to expand the Local Law Enforcement Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009 to include sexual orientation and gender identity in the definition for hate crimes for Michigan. We have a very large collection on Dominic Jacobetti, who was the longest-serving Michigan House of Representatives member, and he was a big advocate for equal protection programs for all citizens, regardless of their backgrounds. And we have a lot more like that. We have the Charles Varnum papers. We have Pat Gagliardi papers. Those are just a couple more representatives that we have. We also have the records of the Episcopal Diocese of Northern Michigan up here. And they're pretty well known for being a very all-inclusive group. Particularly, we have the Bishop Ray papers, and he's known for, in the 70s, he kind of did the push for the church to become a little more inclusive and to really expand it so that everyone would feel welcome and that everyone as part of the congregation could feel a part of the community and that it was a safe space. And these are just a few ways we can help strengthen the community. Any students or even non-students, researchers, even if you're just interested in the topics, if you use our collections, you write a paper, you get a publication, anything that you can help make our collections a little more visible to the public eye. That really helps archives a lot. Just as well, you as patrons can help us identify blind spots in our collections, help us collect a little more inclusively. Or even if we just don't have something like, say there's an organization that you think is really important to the LGBTQ community, and you think it would be really pertinent for those collections to be here so that people could see them. You can talk with us, help us find those collections. And this is just one of the institutions I found in my research for the grant I'm writing right now is the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Religious Archives Network. That's another great community space. They are a more or less a volunteer-run community. Not very many of them were professional archivists to start. This is collections that the community thought were really important and should be displayed, and they just decided, let's get together as a community and make this collection. So that's my little spiel.
Good job. I'd like to open up for questions and discussion.
Did I hear you say that you had LGBT publications with Ontonagon?
I don't know specifically if we have any LGBT stuff, but we do have a lot of newspapers from Ontonagon.
Okay.
So you might find something in there, but
So
yeah, yeah, you might find something, but
breeds a lot of queers, so
yeah,
that's cool. I thought maybe there was some.
I don't know. I hope so, but I'll have to look through those ones.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
For both of you. Chet, your presentation really seemed to focus a lot on, except for the Minnesota example, maybe the Society of American Archivists, page, it seems like the archives were generated by the LGBT community itself. Do either one of you, do you think you could comment or critique the role, the way the profession, how the profession has done in the last 45 years since Howard Zinn gave that speech that Nikki mentioned? For those of you who don't know, Howard Zinn started out as an archivist, but then he became a professional historian and scholar. And his most noted, he became a famous progressive historian, and he's well known for having written the book, The History of People's History of the United States. And he gave a scourging keynote address in the 1970 annual conference of the Society of American Archivists. So my question is, how well have we done? And particularly in regards to LGBT.
Would you like to start?
I would say that the change has been really dramatic in the last 15 years, more than in the previous 15 years or 20 years. When I was in graduate school in the 1980s, my perception of the archives was still of the institutionalized archives for the old generation stories. Why would anybody young go into an archive? Because that's not what they're for. My understanding of the archives has increased dramatically, in part because we have an archive here, and in part because you are the archivist, and you are not the archivist that we had when I was a graduate student in Illinois. So I've also been aware that my colleagues who are doing LGBT history are really excited about archives now, in a way that they say this is new. This is a new thing. It's a new turn in history. So I think it's a lot within the last 15, maybe 10 years.
And I think, a lot like society at large, it's getting a lot better. We've still got a long way to go. I mean, archives since Zinn have been focusing a lot more on acquiring those marginalized records, and not only acquiring records, but also helping to create records. And I think, especially with the advent of the internet and making it a lot easier to communicate across vast distances, it really helps communities come together to record their history. So I think archives are doing a lot more now than they were before. It's just, obviously, the records have to be created first before they can be put in the archives, so it's going to have a little bit of lag time there as the larger social movement moves forward.
If I could add to what I said earlier too, I think in the more 25 years ago past, there was a sense that, well, yes, there may be good queer archives, good spaces for queer archives in New York or in San Francisco or Los Angeles, but never here. And so when I was doing research on the lesbian and gay movement in Michigan in the 1970s, I had to go to Los Angeles because that's where the biggest collection of archival material for the state of Michigan lesbian and gay movement in the 1970s is in Los Angeles at the National One Archive. It's associated with a number of organizations. And I happened to run into somebody I knew from Ann Arbor who was also there doing research on Michigan at the same time. We chuckled that it was ironic that we were both in Los Angeles doing research on Michigan. I think that may be changing with the greater openness and understanding and awareness that you don't have to send your archival material to the other side of the country.
And I think that may be one of the more important changes as well, recognizing that it's not just in the areas where the movement really took place. It's more of a national issue that should be covered in a lot of archives collection development policies.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Thank you. Nobody has any questions? Come on.
Okay.
Yes, you're going.
I was just wondering, there's a museum in San Francisco called the LGBTQ Museum, and I was wondering if they have an archive.
They do. They do. Their museum and their archive is primarily based for the San Francisco Bay Area. But they have a lot, of course, there's been a lot going on in San Francisco for a long time. They do have some national material, but primarily it's San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay.
Boy, I have lots of questions, but I don't want to dominate the conversation. One of the things that kind of bothered me in one part of your response, not personally of course, but you mentioned that this is becoming an inclusive archives, I suppose, because I'm here. That shouldn't be the way. That shouldn't be the case. Professionally, archivists are supposed to be objective, and we have ethical guidelines. Is it your sense then that maybe the change is occurring because there are more progressive-minded archivists coming in, or we are what? How is it? Is the archive that you mentioned in Illinois? Is it better now that person is gone? I mean, do you know?
I have been away from. I've been off that campus for a long time, so it's also related to a big shift in the way that we teach undergraduates. That back in the 1980s, when I was in school, at Illinois, undergraduates in the archives.
Yeah.
Oh my God!
It was like
Oh my
that in
God!
the 80s.
Lock
like
the
that in the
door.
80s.
Shut them out.
Right. Yeah. It was like
So,
that in the 80s.
and graduate students were allowed in on alternate Tuesdays between the hours of 3 and 5 if they asked nicely and
So-
made sure they washed their hands.
So is it maybe patron driven then that's causing the change? Because like you said, the departments are creating more undergraduates using the archives. Just the change in the culture, so that's driving the change in the archives.
These are great questions, and I don't know enough
It's
to
an interesting-
answer the perception of archives,
Uh-huh.
if that's driving what's going on, or if it's something within the archival
Well, I
profession
can tell you
itself.
that I was trained not to bring my own personal, political or ethical, whatever biases I might have into my selection policy.
Mhm.
And you mentioned up there, you said that one, I think it was the Leather Archives had a committee.
Mhm.
Well, I'm the one that makes the decision here,
Mhm.
and it is just me. There's no committee, unless Noah gets
Mhm.
involved somehow. But
My understanding of the Leather Archive is that it's a genuine community archive. That it represents not only the founder, but also a whole very strong internal community within Chicago based.
That would give me a question for you. If the community came forward looking for you to seek out more LGBTQ documents, would you modify the collection development policy to adhere to that?
Yeah, I've been sitting here thinking that's what I need to do. That I need to add that. What Nikki is referring to is that most archives usually have fairly limited resources and ability to collect certain material. So they create what's called a collection development policy, which identifies topical areas and geographic areas and unique time periods that they will collect. So if you look at ours, we have very specific thematic approaches. One is the iron mining industry, because iron mining was a major industry here, the forest industry. But environmental preservation and protection and activism is also one of the areas we collect. Religious records are very important. We also collect political and governmental records, as Nikki pointed out. The Bart Stupak congressional papers are here. But I'd like to mention that I'm a very left-wing Marxist, archivist, historian, I suppose, but I actively collect industrial records and collection of businesses. I'm an atheist, but I actively collect religious records. And I don't distinguish between sex or denominations or whatever. As long as that organization had a major impact on the region's development, then it's fair game to acquire those records. In other words, I don't, I try not to bring my own personal. Now, having said that too, if there was a fairly significant reactionary movement against the LGBT community here, and it was long term, and I might collect those records as well, because they document a critical component to the development, even though I might be personally very much opposed to them. But I won't. This is why I was concerned when you said that I was trained to try to be that way, but and it's I'm hoping that's changing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely.
Has anybody? One of the things that we've been talking about is acquiring these records. Does anybody know where these records come from? What are we talking about? Anybody? How many of you write a letter? Does anybody sit down and write a letter anymore?
I write letters.
Yeah, Simone does. I know Sheila's. Does anybody actually do that? How many of you keep a journal or a diary? Okay, you do. You do. Excellent. Can we read your journal or diary? Huh? Why? Can't you bring it over tomorrow and they might, when I have a class in there, I can have everybody read it? Why? It's personal.
We're still alive.
They're still alive. The point I'm trying to make is that you guys are the ones that are making the history. And unless you create the records, the letters, the journals, the diaries, the things about your life. Dr. DeFonso talked about, what was his name, Treader?
Oh, Treader, yeah.
You know, he was collecting what we call artificial archives. He wasn't creating those records. He was gathering them. He was almost like an independent archivist going out there. But he was gathering it from people who were already creating those records. So I guess my point is that unless you guys are creating and saving and getting those things together, there's nothing for us to collect, and there's nothing for Nikki as a scholar, Dr. DeFonso as a scholar to research. So anything you go out of here with is go out with this determination to print out emails. Don't leave it in don't leave your electronic records on your flash drives or your CDRs or any of those things. Print them out because you will lose them. And I'm starting to ramble. Sorry.
And you might still lose them, but they'll show up in a basement
I'm
somewhere.
I'm going to hear about this tomorrow. So, anything else? Are there any other questions for these two? Terrific presentation. Thank you very much. And please help yourself to some more cookies. We've got cookies and drinks over there before you go. And if you have any questions, you can ask myself. This is Sarah Kisko over here. She's our records analyst. This is number one. Our senior student assistant, who is also a history major and is on her way to being one hell of a scholar. That's Stefan right there. He's our record center coordinator. He's also student assistant here as well. So you can feel free to ask them any questions if you'd like, and also, of course, ask Nikki, because Nikki knows everything. Thank you very much for coming.